What exists beyond birth and death? True enlightenment in Buddhism. Given that passion is something we habitually enjoy, it's not easy to choose a path leading toward total dispassion. You have to be strongly motivated to take it up and to stick with it. At the same time, you have to hold yourself to high standards all along the way, for it's all too easy to fall for subtle levels of passion that can pull you back into the processes leading to renewed suffering and rebirth. This is one of the reasons why right view comes at the beginning of the path, to provide motivation for and guidance to all the other path factors: right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. As a part of right view, conviction in rebirth, and of the influence of action in leading to rebirth, plays an important role in performing both of these functions, motivating the initial choice to follow the path and guiding choices made along the way. We have already noted in Chapter 3, the noble truth of rebirth, how the Buddha used belief in rebirth to inspire a general desire to escape the rounds of suffering. Here, the specifics of right view about rebirth help focus that desire specifically on the path. Some people claim that belief in rebirth breeds complacency. You have many lifetimes to follow the path so you can take your time. But the Buddha's descriptions of the dangers of rebirth present a very different picture. You could die at any moment, and there are plenty of miserable places, realms where it would be impossible to practice, where you could easily be reborn. And even if you do manage to reach a good level of rebirth the next time around, the chances of a good rebirth after that are very slim, so you have to get started on mastering the path while you can. Then the Blessed One, picking up a little bit of dust with the tip of his fingernail, said to the monks, "What do you think, monks? Which is greater, the little bit of dust I have picked up with the tip of my fingernail, or the great earth?" "The great earth is far greater, Lord. The little bit of dust the Blessed One has picked up with the tip of his fingernail is next to nothing. It doesn't even count. It's no comparison. It's not even a fraction. This little bit of dust the Blessed One has picked up with the tip of his fingernail when compared with the great earth." In the same way, monks, few are the beings who, on passing away from the human realm, are reborn among human beings. Far more are the beings who, on passing away from the human realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal womb, in the domain of the hungry ghosts. In the same way, monks, few are the beings who, on passing away from the human realm, are reborn among devas. Far more are the beings who, on passing away from the human realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal womb, in the domain of the hungry ghosts. In the same way, monks, few are the beings who, on passing away from the Deva realm, are reborn among devas. Far more are the beings who, on passing away from the Deva realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal womb, in the domain of the hungry ghosts. In the same way, monks, few are the beings who, on passing away from the Deva realm, are reborn among human beings. Far more are the beings who, on passing away from the Deva realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal womb, in the domain of the hungry ghosts. Therefore, your duty is the contemplation. This is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. Your duty is the contemplation. This is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. Samyutta Nikaya SN 56.102, 113, Pansu Sutta's Dust. Buddha's advice on rebirth and effort. The Buddha also used conviction in rebirth to encourage his listeners not to be deterred by difficulties faced along the path. Compared to the sufferings of repeated rebirth, those difficulties count for nothing. Monks, suppose there was a man whose lifespan was 100 years, who would live to 100. Someone would say to him, "Look here, fellow. They will stab you at dawn with 100 spears, at noon with 100 spears, and again at evening with 100 spears. You, thus stabbed day after day with 300 spears, will have a lifespan of 100 years, will live to be 100, and at the end of 100 years you will realize the 4 noble truths that you have never realized before." Monks, a person who desired his own true benefit would do well to take up the offer. Why is that? From an inconceivable beginning comes transmigration. A beginning point is not evident for the pain of blows from spears, swords, and axes. Even if this offer were to occur, I tell you that the realization of the 4 noble truths would not be accompanied by pain and distress. Instead, I tell you, the realization of the 4 noble truths would be accompanied by pleasure and happiness. Which 4? The noble truth of stress, the noble truth of the origination of stress, the noble truth of the cessation of stress, and the noble truth of the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. Therefore, your duty is the contemplation. This is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. This is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. Samyutta Nikaya 56.35, Satisata Sutta 100 spears. In principle, the path to the end of suffering can be completed in one lifetime. The canon contains many stories of people who gained full awakening after hearing only one of the Buddha's discourses, and Majjhima Nikaya 10, among other discourses, states that in some cases even just 7 days determined practice can be enough to complete the path. But that's in principle. Each person's awakening, though, is a specific case, and the Buddha knew that for most of his listeners, the path would be a multi-lifetime affair. And it's hard not to imagine that many of his listeners, just like many people today, looked at the entanglements of their lives and realized that they would never have enough free time in this lifetime to devote fully to the practice. So instead of trying to please them by paring the path down to what they might reasonably accomplish within the limitations of this lifetime, the Buddha encouraged them with a multi-lifetime perspective on the path to convince them that whatever efforts they made in the direction of awakening wouldn't come to naught. He kept the bar high, and with good reason. Only when you have a realistic view of what the path to the end of suffering actually entails will you be able to follow it and gain the full results. At the same time, the Buddha encouraged people on their deathbed to make an effort to develop dispassion for the various realms of rebirth. He even stated that they might actually achieve full awakening while doing so. In this way, they would be able to prevent huge amounts of future pain and suffering. Samyutta Nikaya SN 55.54. A person assuming only a single lifetime would not see the value of these sorts of efforts, which means that the single lifetime perspective would underestimate what a dying person can do, and would instead favor drugging the person, even to the point of losing mindfulness to reduce his or her present pain. Because a drugged state of mind is in no position to withstand craving, this means that a single lifetime perspective would place the dying person at a severe disadvantage, and would actually be the more complacent and irresponsible view. Buddha's strategy for overcoming clinging and craving. In addition to providing motivation in practicing the path, the assumptions of karma and rebirth play an important role in ferreting out attachments to fabrications and other processes that you might otherwise overlook as you follow the path. If you don't believe, for instance, that a particular instance of passion or delight could have huge repercussions in the future, and if it seems enjoyable right now, you can easily regard it as insignificant and allow it to keep bubbling away in the mind. There is, monks, an intergalactic void, an unrestrained darkness, a pitch-black darkness, where even the light of the sun and moon, so mighty, so powerful, doesn't reach. When this was said, one of the monks said to the Blessed One, "Wow, what a great darkness! What a really great darkness! Is there any darkness greater and more frightening than that?" "There is, monk, a darkness greater and more frightening than that." "And which darkness, Lord, is greater and more frightening than that?" Any contemplatives or Brahmins who do not know as it has come to be that this is stress, who do not know as it has come to be that this is the origination of stress, this is the cessation of stress. This is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. They revel in fabrications leading to birth. They revel in fabrications leading to aging. They revel in fabrications leading to death. They revel in fabrications leading to sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. Reveling in fabrications leading to birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. They fabricate fabrications leading to birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. Fabricating fabrications leading to birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. They drop into the darkness of birth. They drop into the darkness of aging, the darkness of death, darkness of sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. They are not totally released from birth, aging, death, sorrows, lamentations, pains, distresses, and despairs. They are not totally released, I tell you, from suffering and stress. Samyutta Nikaya, SN 56.46, and Hakara Sutta, darkness. Only when you appreciate the potential for even the most natural or innocuous-seeming attachment to lead to long-term suffering will you be willing to take it seriously and work to abandon it. And only then will you really be following the path. We've already noted in Chapter 3 that a multi-lifetime perspective helps to keep you on track in the area of virtue, a point that applies to the path factors of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. The same principle also applies to the factors more directly connected to meditation. This can be illustrated with two examples from the Buddha's two-step meditative strategy for developing dispassion for clinging and craving. The first step. In the first step, he has you focus on the drawbacks of craving for sensuality, the mind's tendency to get obsessed with plans for sensual pleasures. If you're limited to an exclusively one-life view of the practice, it's hard to fully appreciate the power and drawbacks of sensual craving. After all, the evolution of life has depended on this craving, and for many people it provides the only pleasure and excitement they know. So it's easy to justify sensuality as a good thing. Even when you consider the many drawbacks of sensuality visible in this life, it remains simply a matter of taste as to whether you feel the drawbacks are enough to deter you from sensual pursuits. Some people prefer peace and safety, others the thrills of danger and risk. If everything ends in oblivion and annihilation, who's to say that harmful pleasures are worse than harmless? But when you take seriously the long-term consequences of sensuality over many lifetimes, it changes the equation entirely. You find it easier to see that the pleasures and thrills offered by sensuality are not worth the price. It's with sensuality for the reason, sensuality for the source, that people engage in bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct. Having engaged in bodily, verbal, and mental misconduct, they, with the breakup of the body after death, reappear in a plane of deprivation, a bad destination, a lower realm, hell. Majjhima Nikaya MN 13. Maha Dukkha Sutta, the Great Mass of Stress. Only when you can see sensuality in this light are you genuinely ready to follow the path to fully undercut the sensual craving that acts as one of the causes of suffering and stress. However, even this understanding is not enough to uproot sensual craving. The mind needs an alternate source of pleasure to sustain it on the path. This pleasure is provided by jhana, the path factor of right concentration. Even though a disciple of the Noble Ones has clearly seen with right discernment as it has come to be that sensuality is of much stress, much despair, and greater drawbacks, still, if he has not attained a rapture and pleasure apart from sensuality, apart from unskillful mental qualities, or something more peaceful than that, he can be tempted by sensuality. But when he has clearly seen with right discernment as it has come to be that sensuality is of much stress, much despair, and greater drawbacks, and he has attained a rapture and pleasure apart from sensuality, apart from unskillful qualities, or something more peaceful than that, he cannot be tempted by sensuality. Majjhima Nikaya 14, Kula Dukkha Khandha Sutta, the lesser mass of stress. Still, even though the pleasures of jhana are a necessary part of the path, they aren't totally safe. To enter jhana is to take on a state of becoming, and so it too can be an object of craving. And because some of the higher jhanas touch dimensions of nothingness and neither perception nor non-perception, they are easy to mistake for states of non-becoming. This means that even though the practice of jhana can help you overcome sensual craving, on its own it's not enough to overcome the two remaining types of craving, for becoming and non-becoming, that lead to further suffering and stress. Here again, a multi-lifetime perspective is helpful in detecting these subtle attachments that even the contemplation of not-self, if it's not informed by this perspective, can easily miss. As MN 106 states, it's possible to develop the perception of not-self, applying it to all phenomena, and arrive at a refined formless level of jhana, the dimension of nothingness. At that point, you experience a subtle level of equanimity, so subtle that you can easily miss the fact that you're clinging to it. If you don't see that even this equanimity can lead to future dangers, you won't feel inclined to investigate it. This may be why many meditators with a one-lifetime perspective equate equanimity with nibbana. They don't see that there's any need to question their attainment of refined equanimity, for they feel it's enough to maintain them in good stead through the remainder of this lifetime. And if they hold to the materialist view that all we can know is known through the senses, then equanimity in the face of sensory experience would be the greatest peace they could imagine. But as the Buddha points out in Samyutta Nikaya 35.117, there is a dimension of experience beyond the senses where an even greater peace can be found through the total end of fabrication. And as he states in Majjhima Nikaya 140, if, with the possibility of this more peaceful dimension in mind, you see that even subtle levels of equanimity can lead to long lifetimes, but that those lifetimes will end. You're more inclined to investigate those levels of equanimity to see how they're fabricated. Only through this sort of investigation can you develop dispassion for the last traces of seemingly innocuous fabrication that stand in the way of full release, This is the second step in the Buddha's strategy. In one of the standard descriptions for how to develop dispassion for jhana, the Buddha first has, you master jhana. You can't overcome attachment to it by not doing it. Then he has you contemplate the mental events sustaining jhana as processes, aggregates, which play a role in dependent co-arising under the factors of fabrication, consciousness, and name, to see that they too have their drawbacks. This focuses attention directly on the factors that dependent co-arising, in its various models, highlights as the spots where the self-sustaining processes leading to suffering can be starved. This is also where we most clearly see why the Buddha discussed all the factors leading to rebirth as processes. If you're looking for your inner essence or the ground of being for the world, it's all too easy, when reaching a state of jhana, to mistake that state for what you're looking for. This, however, leads simply to more ignorance and attachment. But if you view jhana as the result of actions and processes, then when you reach this stage, you find it easier to develop dispassion for jhana without feeling that anything substantial is being lost. Suppose that an archer or archer's apprentice were to practice on a straw man or mound of clay, so that after a while he would become able to shoot long distances, to fire accurate shots in rapid succession, and to pierce great masses. In the same way, there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. He regards whatever phenomena there that are connected with form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness as inconstant, stressful, a disease, a cancer, an arrow, painful, an affliction, alien, a disintegration, an emptiness, not self. He turns his mind away from those phenomena, and having done so, inclines his mind to the property of deathlessness. This is peace. This is exquisite. The resolution of all fabrications, the relinquishment of all acquisitions, the ending of craving, dispassion, cessation, unbinding. Similarly with the second, third, and fourth jhana. Anguttara Nikaya 9.36, Jhana Sutta, mental absorption. In line with the Buddha's approach of seeing how these processes manifest on many levels, he advises that you view even the being doing jhana as a process composed of aggregates. When this contemplation yields a sense of dispassion for all aggregates past, present, and future, even those used on the path, it starves the process by which craving can lead to further rebirth. Where there is no passion for the nutriment of physical food, where there is no delight, no craving, then consciousness does not land there or increase. Where consciousness does not land or increase, there is no alighting of name and form. Where there is no alighting of name and form, there is no growth of fabrications. Where there is no growth of fabrications, there is no production of renewed becoming in the future. Where there is no production of renewed becoming in the future, there is no future birth, aging, and death. That, I tell you, has no sorrow, affliction, or despair. Similarly with the nutriment of sensory contact, the nutriment of intellectual intention, and the nutriment of sensory consciousness. Samyutta Nikaya 12.64, Ati Raga Sutta, where there is passion. If a monk abandons passion for the property of form, the property of feeling, the property of perception, the property of fabrications, the property of consciousness, then owing to the abandonment of passion, the support is cut off, and there is no landing of consciousness. Consciousness, thus not having landed, not increasing, not concocting, is released. Owing to its release, it is steady. Owing to its steadiness, it is contented. Owing to its contentment, it is not agitated. Not agitated, one is totally unbound right within. One discerns that birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for the sake of this world. Samyutta Nikaya 22.54, Bija Sutta, means of propagation. What remains is a dimension free of birth and death. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, there would not be the case that emancipation from the born, become, made, fabricated would be discerned. But precisely because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, emancipation from the born, become, made, fabricated is discerned. Udana UD 8.3, Nibbana Sutta, unbinding. This dimension is characterized by a type of consciousness that lies outside of the range of the sensory consciousness involved in dependent co-arising and the realm of the six senses, a realm the Buddha calls the all. Thus, it's totally free from suffering. Consciousness without surface, endless radiant all around, has not been experienced through the earthness of earth, the liquidity of liquid, the fieriness of fire, the windiness of wind, the allness of the all. Majjhima Nikaya 49, Brahma Nimantanika Sutta. The canonical image for this sort of consciousness, totally independent of nutriment, is of a ray of light that doesn't land anywhere. Just as if there were a roofed house or a roofed hall having windows on the north, the south, or the east. When the sun rises and a ray has entered by way of the window, where does it land? On the western wall, Lord. And if there is no western wall, where does it land? On the ground, Lord. And if there is no ground, where does it land? On the water, Lord. And if there is no water, where does it land? It does not land, Lord. In the same way, where there is no passion for the nutriment of physical food, contact, intellectual intention, consciousness, where there is no delight, no craving, then consciousness does not land there or grow. Where consciousness does not land or grow, name and form does not alight. Where name and form does not alight, there is no growth of fabrications. Where there is no growth of fabrications, there is no production of renewed becoming in the future. Where there is no production of renewed becoming in the future, there is no future birth, aging, and death. That, I tell you, has no sorrow, affliction, or despair. Samyutta Nikaya SN 12.64 Ati Raga Sutta, where there is passion. In line with his discussion of rebirth, the Buddha never offered a metaphysical explanation of what this consciousness is or how it might be. After all, it would be a mistake to justify the reality of the unconditioned with reference to the conditioned, as it's not dependent on anything or any how in any way. However, the Buddha did show how to get there. That's why his image for the practice is a path. A path to a mountain doesn't cause the mountain, but it does provide the opportunity for walking there. The path of practice doesn't cause the unconditioned, but it does provide the opening for attaining it. The canon, when describing a person's full awakening, never depicts the accompanying knowledge as touching on what or how this unconditioned consciousness is. Instead, the knowledge is said to begin with a realization of release from the asavas, fermentations, effluents, of sensuality, becoming, and ignorance, MN 19, along with the realization that that release is once and for all, MN 146. Then it proceeds to a realization of the future implications of that release, DN 29, starting with the fact that it has put an end to any future rebirth. In the Buddha's own case, he expressed the knowledge like this. Knowledge and vision arose in me. Unprovoked is my release. This is the last birth. There is now no further becoming. Samyutta Nikaya 56.11 Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, setting the wheel of Dhamma in motion. The two most frequently used descriptions of the knowledge accompanying the attainment of arahatship make the same point like this. With release, there is the knowledge released. One discerns that birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for the sake of this world. Samyutta Nikaya 35.28 Adita Pariyaya Sutta, the Fire Sermon. Dwelling alone, secluded, heedful, ardent, and resolute, then Anuruddha in no long time reached and remained in the supreme goal of the holy life for which clansmen rightly go forth from home into homelessness, knowing and realizing it for himself in the here and now. He knew, birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for the sake of this world, and thus, then, Anuruddha became another one of the arahants. Anguttara Nikaya, and 8.30 Anuruddha Sutta. In other words, when the mind returns to the fabricated dimension after its total encounter with the unfabricated dimension and has realized its release, the realization that it's through with birth, rebirth, on both the macro and the micro levels, is the first thing that spontaneously occurs to it. This realization of the ending of birth leads to the further realization that all suffering has been ended as well. Modern ironies. People who hold to a modern materialist view of the world and the self tend to react to these canonical descriptions of what is known in awakening by offering three main reasons for resisting them. The first is that these descriptions, in their eyes, go beyond what a human being could possibly know. Sometimes this argument is supported by the claim that the canon's descriptions violate the Buddha's own criteria, stated elsewhere in the discourses, for what can and cannot be known. The passage most commonly cited in this argument is this: what is the all? Simply the eye and forms, ear and sounds, nose and aromas, tongue and flavors, body and tactile sensations, intellect and ideas. This, monks, is termed the all. Anyone who would say, repudiating this all, I will describe another, if questioned on what exactly might be the grounds for his statement, would be unable to explain, and furthermore, would be put to grief. Why? Because it lies beyond range. Samyutta Nikaya 35.23. The argument maintains that beyond range here means beyond the range of possible knowledge. Therefore, the existence of a dimension lying beyond the six senses, such as that of consciousness without surface described in Majjhima Nikaya 49, is impossible to know. This would invalidate any claim that one has known such things, and, by implication, the freedom from rebirth that such a knowledge would imply. However, there is clear evidence that beyond range here simply means beyond the range of adequate description, for there are other canonical passages indicating that even though the dimension beyond the six senses cannot be adequately described, it can still be known. Mahakotita, with the remainderless ceasing and fading of the six spheres of contact, vision, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and intellection, is it the case that there is anything else? Sariputta, don't say that, my friend. Mahakotita, with the remainderless ceasing and fading of the six spheres of contact, is it the case that there is not anything else? Sariputta, don't say that, my friend. Mahakotita, is it the case that there both is and is not anything else? Sariputta, don't say that, my friend. Mahakotita, is it the case that there neither is nor is not anything else? Sariputta, don't say that, my friend. Mahakotita, being asked, if there is anything else, you say, don't say that, my friend. Being asked, if there is not anything else, if there both is and is not anything else, if there neither is nor is not anything else, you say, don't say that, my friend. Now, how is the meaning of this statement to be understood? Sariputta, saying, is it the case that there is anything else? Is it the case that there is not anything else? Is it the case that there both is and is not anything else? Is it the case there neither is nor is not anything else? One is objectifying the non-objectified. However far the six spheres of contact go, that is how far objectification goes. However far objectification goes, that is how far the 6 spheres of contact go. With the remainderless ceasing and fading of the 6 spheres of contact, there comes to be the ceasing, the allaying of objectification. Anguttara Nikaya 4.174. Monks, that dimension should be experienced where the eye vision ceases and the perception of form fades. That dimension should be experienced where the ear ceases and the perception of sound fades, where the nose ceases and the perception of aroma fades, where the tongue ceases and the perception of flavor fades, where the body ceases and the perception of tactile sensation fades, where the intellect ceases and the perception of idea phenomenon fades. That dimension should be experienced. SN 35.117. So there's nothing in the Pali discourses to indicate that the Buddha would have agreed with a modern materialist view that experience is limited to the 6 senses. And it's doubtful that he would have tried to justify his claims in terms that a modern materialist would accept. After all, he noted that the Buddha range of a Buddha and the jhana range of a person in jhana are inconceivables that are not to be conjectured about, that would bring madness and vexation to anyone who conjectured about them. And 4.77. This means that he wouldn't encourage the sort of conjecture that a materialist, or anyone else, might make about what a mind trained to master jhana or attain the supreme level of awakening could or couldn't know. A second modern argument against accepting the canonical accounts of what's known in awakening, and in particular, the knowledge of rebirth achieved in awakening, is that one can still obtain all the results of the practice without having to accept the possibility of rebirth. After all the factors leading to suffering are all immediately present to awareness, so there should be no need when trying to abandon them, to accept any premises about where they may or may not lead in the future. This objection, however, ignores the role of appropriate attention on the path. As we noted above, one of its roles is to examine and abandon the assumptions that underlie one's views on the metaphysics of personal identity. Unless you're willing to step back from your own views, such as those concerning what a person is and why that makes rebirth impossible, and subject them to this sort of examination, there's something lacking in your path. You'll remain entangled in the questions of inappropriate attention, which will prevent you from actually identifying and abandoning the causes of suffering and achieving the full results of the practice. In addition, the terms of appropriate attention, the 4 noble truths, are not concerned simply with events arising and passing away in the present moment. They also focus on the causal connections among those events, connections that occur both in the immediate present and over time. If you limit your focus solely to connections in the present while ignoring those over time, you can't fully comprehend the ways in which craving causes suffering, not only by latching on to the 4 kinds of nutriment, but also giving rise to the 4 kinds of nutriment as well. This narrow focus places an obstacle in your ability to develop right view, and in particular, your ability to see dependent co-arising as a self-sustaining process. If, in line with the standard materialist view, you regard consciousness as a mere byproduct of material processes, then there's no way you can appreciate the full power of consciousness and craving to generate the food that can sustain the processes of suffering indefinitely. And if you don't fully appreciate this power, there's no way that you can effectively bring it to an end. A third argument against accepting the knowledge of rebirth as a necessary part of awakening is that many modern people who claim to have experienced the levels of awakening described in the canon gain no knowledge of rebirth or of the end of rebirth as part of those experiences. The fact that people in the Buddha's time claim to gain this sort of knowledge in the course of their awakening can thus be written off as a cultural artifact. They were primed to see it because of their cultural background, and so it wasn't really an essential part of the experience. There are, however, two problems with this argument. The first is that, as we have seen, rebirth was not a universally accepted assumption in the Buddha's time. An important part of any person's experience of awakening, then as now, would be to prove for oneself whether the Buddha was right on the topic. The second, more telling, problem with this third argument is that it actually defeats itself. If one's experiences of awakening don't agree with the canon's descriptions of the levels of awakening, why would one want to claim the canon's labels for those experiences? An essential part of even the first level of awakening described in the canon, stream entry, confirms the rightness of right view, MN 48, which includes the understanding that there is a deathless, birthless dimension, MVI 23.5, and that there is a level of craving that, if not abandoned, will lead to repeated birth. The distinguishing mark of the attainment of arahatship, as opposed to the lower levels of awakening recognized in the canon, is that it has put an end to that craving, thus putting an end to birth. If the canon is wrong on these points, then the terms it uses to describe the levels of awakening are bogus as well. This means that if one's experience of awakening doesn't match the descriptions in the canon, one would do well to examine one's motivation for wanting to claim a canonical label for that experience. If one's teacher has certified that experience with a canonical name, the teacher's knowledge and motivation should be examined too. And if one seriously wants to put an end to suffering, one would do well to take to heart the canon's insistence that if one's awakening has not put an end to becoming and birth, the possibility for continued suffering remains. The irony in all three of these arguments against the teaching on rebirth is that the people who make them all assume that the Buddha was incapable of questioning the views of his time, and yet the fact is that they themselves are unwilling to accept the Buddha's challenge to step back and question their own. We know how the Buddha responded to materialism in his own time, and there's no reason to assume that he would respond any differently to materialism today. Some people might object that modern materialism is much more sophisticated now than it was in the time of the Buddha, and so it deserves a more serious hearing. But is that really the case? The questions that neurobiologists presently bring to issues of consciousness. What is personal identity? What sort of thing is consciousness? How can consciousness be measured in material terms? Are precisely the questions that the Buddha listed under inappropriate attention. Even though modern scientific experiments may be more sophisticated than Prince Payasi's experiments on criminals, the scientists who conduct them are just as wrong-headed in thinking that a phenomenological process, consciousness and mental events as experienced from within, can be captured and measured in physical terms. Although rebirth is often presented as an unscientific view, the material sciences actually have no way at all of proving the issue one way or the other. As for the efficacy of human action, the scientific method can never prove whether the scientists applying it are actually exercising free will in designing their experiments. It also can't prove whether their actions in designing and running an experiment actually have an impact on the experiment's results. Scientific inquiry and peer review certainly act as if these assumptions are true. The idea of criticizing a poorly designed experiment would make no sense if scientists had no free will in designing their experiments. And if we can judge by appearances, the assumption of free will and the responsibilities it carries have been crucial in enabling scientific knowledge to advance. But the scientific method itself can't prove whether the appearance of free will and efficacious action is anything more than an appearance. And of course, there's the irony that many scientists assume that the phenomena they observe operate under strict deterministic laws, while the method they employ assumes that they themselves are not driven by such laws in applying that method. This means that science is in no position to prove or disprove the Buddha's teachings on the range and powers of human action. Finally, there's the whole question of how valid it is to divorce the Buddha's psychological insights from his cosmological teachings. As we noted in Chapter 1, we in the West, beginning with the European Romantics and American Transcendentalists, have long assumed that cosmology is the rightful sphere of the physical sciences, while religion should limit itself to the care of the human psyche. But one of the central insights of the Buddha's awakening is that events on the micro scale in the mind actually shape experiences on the macro scale in time and space. If we can't question the clear line our culture draws between psychology and cosmology, we won't be in a position to appreciate the ways in which the Buddha's insight on this issue can actually help bring suffering to an end. So we're faced with a choice. If we're sincere about wanting to end suffering and to give the Buddha's teachings a fair test, then, instead of assuming that he was a prisoner of his own time and place, unable to question his cultural assumptions, we have to examine the extent to which, in adhering to our own cultural assumptions, we're imprisoning ourselves. If we don't want to drop our self-imposed restrictions, we can still benefit from any of the Buddha's teachings that fit within those limitations. But we'll have to accept the consequences, that the results we'll get will be limited as well. Only if we're willing to submit to the test of appropriate attention, abandoning the presuppositions that distort our thinking about issues like karma and rebirth, will we be able to make full use of the canon's tools for gaining total release.